Welcome. Welcome to the 19th annual Ridenhour Prizes. It has been 3 years since we've been here together in person, but since that time we have been able to create a new digital community, both inside the Beltway but also beyond. And those are people who are recognizing the critical importance of uplifting those who speak truth to power. My name is Danielle Bryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight. This is our first hybrid experience where we have limited the number of people here in the room while constructing a digital experience. So we have people who are watching online right now so that they can celebrate with us, but in their own comfort level. We are here today to honor the spirit of fearless truth-telling that our namesake, the investigative journalist and whistleblower Ron Ridenhour, exemplified throughout his life and work. The Ridenhour Prizes recognize, celebrate, and amplify the stories of individuals who persevere in acts of truth-telling to strengthen our democracy or illuminate a more just vision of society. And through our work, we hope to embolden individuals like yourselves to enact change within your communities. Some of our Ridenhour trailblazers are here with us today. Thomas Tam, Sonia Kennebeck, Jane Mayer, and I especially want to thank and recognize Rick Bright, Dr. Rick Bright, who is our 2020 truth teller. Could you stand up? He was our 2020 truth teller for his brave efforts to call out the Trump administration's early failure to acknowledge the COVID pandemic. He received that award virtually, and this is his first attendance at the award, so I wanted him to feel some of that love that he deserves. So please show all of our past honorees the love they deserve. I'd also like to note that Maj Satko is here today. He recently educated the Senate Judiciary Committee about the ongoing security problems at Twitter. So thank you for joining us as well. On behalf of our strategic partners, the Fertel Foundation, the Stuart R. Mott Foundation, the Project on Government Oversight, Type Media Center, and the Government Accountability Project, I would like to thank the organizations and people whose support has made this event possible. Cross Currents Foundation, Defending Dissent, Democracy Fund, Katz, Marshall & Banks, and Zuckerman Law. And our individual supporters, some of you here are in the room and some of you are watching online, and you're giving individually, and it's fantastic. Throughout the afternoon, I hope you will all consider joining them. For those of you here in person, you'll see there's a QR code that's on your table that will take you to a donation page. And for those of you who are watching online, our moderators will be adding the link into the chat. Your support helps to demonstrate that there is a community of organizations and individuals who are proud to celebrate and amplify the voices of those fighting for a stronger democracy. And fighting is what we have to do to meet the urgency of this moment. We are living in a global movement towards authoritarianism. And here in the United States, it is undergirded by white supremacy and misogyny. The people we have honored in the past and who we will honor today are this country's most powerful counter to that threat. And now, please welcome our co-founder, Randy Fertel, who with Hamilton Fish created this platform to honor the legacy of Ron Ridenhour. Randy?
It's good to be back. For many years, Ron visited my Vietnam War course at Tulane to speak about the My Lai massacre. Bringing Ron to my class had legitimate pedagogic purposes. The theme of atrocity, of horrific acts beyond the pale, is ubiquitous in the literary annals of the war. Having taught the war for decades, I was primed to appreciate Ron's role in bringing My Lai to light. But there was something special Ron brought to my classes, which I'd like to try to explain today, a bit circuitously, but I hope you'll bear with me. I have to start with the city Ron and I shared. New Orleans is a city with a serious crush on itself. How do we show our self-love? One way is by throwing parties, both peculiar and fabulous. Think Mardi Gras and second line parades at jazz funerals. Another is how our artists celebrate what makes us special. Louis Armstrong signs his letters, "Red beans and ricely yours." Another is the great essayist and novelist Walker Percy. The Modern Library honored his debut novel, The Moviegoer, as one of the 100 best English language novels of the 20th century. Percy's hero, Binks Bowling, is a prosperous young stockbroker living in Gentilly, a leafy New Orleans suburb where I grew up. Outwardly, everything is going his way, but he's troubled. A Korean War veteran, Binks has entered a dark wood, which he calls his malaise, his illness, his unease. Percy was influenced by the French existentialists. His hero, or anti-hero, wanders New Orleans, searching for meaning. After lunch at Galatoire's, a legendary French Quarter institution, Binks strolls Bourbon Street, New Orleans at its darkest, but suddenly he sees Gregory Peck. His spirits are lifted. He is a moviegoer, after all. Reflecting on his change of heart, Binks names this experience certification. That's something we all may have experienced, certification. A brush with Hollywood or some comparable corner of fame certifies us. We're fed by their infusion of charisma. For a moment, our troubles are erased, or at least muted. I've met a few starry types and can confirm that special spark, but Binks is a quester for meaning. He knows right away that certification is not a cure for his malaise. Like Binks, my malaise calls for another kind of radiance. I'm drawn to the radiant presence of people who have touched history. That was the special charge for me and my students. Being in Ron's presence, we were, for a moment, certified. Sorry. Without Ron Ridenhour, what happened at the My Lai massacre would mirror in history books the Army's after-action report, a great American victory against Viet Cong regulars, the righteous deaths of 126 well-armed guerrillas. Those were the alternative facts. The true facts, the abuse and murder of 504 unarmed civilians, old men, women, and children, in our name. Ron threw truth in the face of what World War I poet Wilfred Owen called the old lie, that killing and dying for one's nation is sweet and fitting. He touched history, though not as much as had hoped. Charges for the criminal acts committed at My Lai did not ascend the chain of command to those who could and should have stopped the massacre, the majors and colonels who watched the carnage from helicopters for 4 long hours. Here's Ron.
President Nixon appointed a special blue ribbon panel called the Peers Commission under a lieutenant general, a 3-star general, William R. Peers, and their task was to investigate it thoroughly and to make. Nixon, of course, when he appointed this panel, promised everybody, promised the public, that when their investigation, the Peers panel investigation, was complete, all of their findings would be made public and their record would be fully disclosed. Peers completed his investigation in the spring of 1970. I guess it must have been in March sometime. And he recommended, I believe, that a total of 28 officers be charged. Soon thereafter, President Nixon decided that this would be a matter that must be handled by military courts and not by federal civil court, although the law allows either. And 2 weeks after Piers made his recommendations, about 25 of the officers that he suggested that he thought should be charged were mustered out of the Army, and therefore put beyond the reach of military law. I couldn't believe these things were happening. You know, I really, it was sort of a, it's hard for me to describe how ill-prepared I was for this role. I just found myself in it and felt compelled to act and tried to. But watching it all unravel from the time that I wrote the letter till the time that it became public, and over the period of time that it was public, which was about 2 years, when this story was in one way or another on the front pages of America's daily newspapers, literally almost every day for 2 years, I watched in amazement as the cover-up was perfected. If you ask people today what happened at My Lai, most people, young people, don't even know about it. Older people, folks who were politically conscious and paying attention at that time, if you asked most of them, they would say, "Oh yeah, isn't that place in Vietnam where that lieutenant, what was his name, Kelly, something like that, went crazy and killed all those people?" Well, that's what the military wanted us to believe, but that isn't what happened.
Because those leaders and their accomplices were spared, Ron thought history had passed him by. But the My Lai massacre, along with the Tet Offensive and the Pentagon Papers, soured a large proportion of the American citizenry on our misadventure in Southeast Asia. Because of Ron Ridenhour, it was the beginning of the end. Today, we can put Ron's exposure of the My Lai alongside the January 6th committee. Let's hope the committee has a comparable effect in changing minds, and that the charges move up the chain of command beyond the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. The often humble but always radiant presence of those who touch history is what brings us here to the Ridenhour Prizes. Our winners have profoundly touched and shaped history. To be near them is uplifting, certifying. Like Walker Percy's Binks Bowling, I will go back to my life hunting for meaning. But these events at the National Press Club convince me that the meaning of life hinges on truth-telling, on speaking truth to power, on fighting for transparency in government, and always on celebrating those heroes who touch and change history. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy, for helping to draw that line from Ron to the honorees we celebrate today. That's why we're here, not only to recognize our extraordinary awardees, but also to amplify their work so they'll inspire future change makers. Our first award, the Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize, is presented to a citizen, corporate, or government whistleblower, investigative journalist, or organization for bringing a specific issue of social importance to the public's attention. Our truth-tellers often make the decision to speak up in the face of extraordinary risk to their livelihood, to their freedom, and in today's case, even to her personal safety. As Congressman Jamie Raskin said, "Thank you, Anika Navaroli, for answering the call of the committee and your country." Let's watch.
What was your gut feeling on the night of January 5th?
I believe I sent a Slack message to someone that said something along the lines of, "When people are shooting each other tomorrow, I will try and rest in the knowledge that we tried." And so I went to, I don't know that I slept that night, to be honest with you. I was on pins and needles because, again, for months I had been begging and anticipating and attempting to raise the reality that if we made no intervention into what I saw occurring, people were going to die. And on January 5th, I realized no intervention was coming. And even as hard as I had tried to create one or implement one, there was nothing, and we were at the whims and the mercy of a violent crowd that was locked and loaded.
And just for the record, this was content that was echoing statements by the former president, but also Proud Boys and other known violent extremist groups.
Yeah.
You got to hear this. His commentary was described by the Pulitzer Committee as combining masterful writing with a deep knowledge of history and a deft reporter's touch to bring context and clarity to the issue of race at a time when respectful dialogue on the subject often gives way to finger-pointing and derision. Thank you, Jelani.
Good afternoon. Seriously. Do we have to do this? Good afternoon. Okay, all right. I want to say congratulations to all of the honorees. I am particularly proud to be able to present this award, having just learned not only of Ms. Navaroli's courage, but also that she is an alumna of Columbia Journalism School. So, this makes me even prouder, as you might imagine. Democracy is under attack. This is not hyperbole or exaggeration. It's not overheated rhetoric. It is a sober and increasingly apparent fact. We have seen a stunning array of departures from democratic practices and norms that coincided with, but were not confined to, the previous presidential administration. In fact, it reminds us of the fact that autocracy seeks to undermine democracy democratically, which is to say, it seeks to utilize the instruments of democracy toward anti-democratic ends. This is evident in many areas, in many places, but nowhere is it more vividly apparent than in our own conversations about free speech, technology, and social media. And nowhere was the import of that debate about free speech, technology, and social media more crucial than on January 6th, 2021, when an armed mob descended upon the United States Congress with the spoken intent of overturning a legal election and potentially lynching the sitting Vice President of the United States. These actions were coordinated and apparent on social media. And for me, observing them at home, as many people were, it reminded me of something that had become almost unmistakable in the course of the preceding 5 years, which is the stunning quotient of cowardice that abided the erosion of American democracy. I'm reminded of James Baldwin's statement that the world is held together by the love of a shockingly small number of people. And I would amend that to say, the bravery also. In the context of these threats, and in the context of this capitulation, I'll say one last thing. I was called upon to remind my students that everyone we admire, everyone who we celebrate for any reason, is recognized for what they did in a moment in which other people were afraid. And so it gives me great pride and honor to award the Ridenhour Prize to Anika Navaroli for her courage, for her effort to warn about the impending crisis, and for her work supporting the continued existence of this democracy which we are attempting to achieve in the United States. Anika?
Thank you all for having me. It's truly an honor to receive this prize. When I first learned that I would be honored with this award, I was still anxiously struggling to come to terms with my new identity as a whistleblower. I'll admit the first few times the word was used to refer to me, I recoiled. Whistleblower sounded so intense and adversarial. And so when I learned that I would be honored with the Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize, I felt this rush of comfort in finding a framing that felt like it fit the work that I was trying to do. Because at the root of it, my goal since I began this journey has been to tell the truth. So here I am. And for the next few minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about my path to this moment. As you all know, and as you just saw until recently, my identity had been concealed behind that voice distortion software and that cartoon silhouette. It was really disembodying, even seeing it again. And I initially joked to those around me that I had made my iRobot debut. Right. But then this curious thing started happening, and it really shifted my lighthearted approach. These purported pinnacles of truth, like newswire services, began to make assumptions about who I was, and headlines across the country incorrectly identified me as male. As other outlets picked up the story, I watched them mirror this assumption and my identity, and I watched them publicly misgender me. I quickly realized that if media institutions were so quick to assume that I was male, the other aspects of my identity, like my race and my sexual orientation, had also been sanitized to fit this palatable presentation. It became clear to me that society had an expectation and an image of who and what a powerful tech worker could or should be. And I, a Black queer woman and a truth teller, certainly did not fit the mold. But I knew differently. I knew that in spite of it all, I had a place in the halls of Congress telling the truth about the most powerful people on this planet, because Anita Hill taught me. When Miss Anita Hill donned that teal suit and paved the path that I would follow back in the early 90s, I watched and I listened as my mother and my aunties and the multitudes of Black women in my community were transfixed by these congressional hearings where they saw themselves and their experiences reflected for the first time. Later, as I entered into the daily practice of being a technology policy practitioner and moderating social media content, I always hoped that my work would have meaningful impact. but I never really imagined that by attempting to do my job well, I would somehow enter this crash course with some of the most momentous events in world history. I think that it's really rare to see a clear demarcation between right and wrong being ripped before your eyes. And when I encountered these moments, I remembered Anita Hill, and I knew the path that I needed to walk on to be on the right side of history. I had to tell the truth. During this truth-telling experience, I have experienced some of the most isolating moments of my life. Telling the truth is lonely, and it is terrifying. And in that vast stillness, I have drawn boundless strength from those who have walked before me. And as I accept this award for telling the truth in the face of threats to my safety and my career, I want to share some of the lessons that I've learned through the gateway of history. I've learned that the long-term impact of the truth is greater than the momentary crisis. I've learned that creating a lasting record of the truth matters, even if some refuse to listen. And I've learned that sharing the truth is more important than the structures of power choosing to maintain the status quo. Finally, I know that telling the truth has a seismic impact that reverberates for generations to come. So I'm going to continue to tell the truth. We are on a catastrophic collision course. Our nation is only beginning to think about the impact content moderation policy and enforcement has on the very fabric of our society. We have not yet recognized the power that unrestrained social media has had on our relationships, our communities, our governments, and the very notion of truth itself. My hope is that by coming forward, we begin the process of understanding these systems in a way that leads to change. I also hope that my footsteps on this journey will illuminate a path for those who come next. I hope that my very existence shows that people who look like me and people who love like me belong in rooms of power. To all the Black women, the people of color, the non-binary folks, the trans folks, and the queer folks who have come before, and to those that are on their way, we need you. We need your brilliance. We need your contributions. We need you on this planet to shape change, and we need you to tell your truths out loud. Thank you all again for listening.
Thank you so much, Anika, for all you've done. And I wonder who in the next 30 years is going to look back at your testimony and have that be the spark that causes them to speak out. Whistleblowers are a pillar of accountability that protect our democracy. It's equally vital that we tell the truth about the past. That's why we're so grateful for the work of the next honorees. The Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize is given to a documentary film that, in the view of the judges, best reflects the legacy of Ron Ridenhour. The prize seeks to recognize a documentary that defends the public interest, advances or promotes social justice, or illuminates a more just vision of society. In their Oscar-nominated film, Stanley Nelson Jr. and Traci Curry chronicle the 1971 Attica Prison Rebellion, the deadliest prison uprising in U.S. history. Attica traces the uprising from the inhumane conditions that prompted it to the law enforcement attack that brought the four-day standoff to a deadly close. Centering the stories of the men who were there, the film helps show how that brutal conclusion was not inevitable, and for a while at least, a change in the way that our government treats incarcerated people seemed within reach. Let's watch.
Attica was fear.
There was 70% black and brown prisoners, all white guards. What could go wrong?
grab the guards, grab the keys.
All hell broke loose.
Tell me this, are these primarily blacks?
Guys were complaining about the basic things like toothpaste. A roll of toilet paper can last you a month.
The inmates were considered like animals.
They beat you up in your cell and then they take you to segregation, and sometimes you don't come back.
Have the inmates made any demands?
There are all kinds of demands for change in the whole world.
This had to be mediated, otherwise it was going to end in disaster. They wanted to use those weapons.
Put your hands in the air and you will not be harmed.
You will not be harmed.
You will not be harmed. But that was bullshit.
They want to kill us. We are men.
He was waking up America. Somebody had to take a stand.
Presenting the Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize to Stanley Nelson Jr. and Traci A. Curry is Tyrone Larkins, an Attica Uprising survivor.
Thank you. Thank you. A little intimidated, but thank you. Wow. First and foremost, I thank God for being selected as the presenter of the Ridenhour Prize Award to Stanley Nelson and Traci Curry for the documentary Attica. Both Stan and Traci, they was very, very patient with me and others to get the truth. Information concerning this event, while doing the interviews that I had with Traci, she emphasized that what was written, and she wanted to seek the truth. She didn't want a fairy tale. She didn't want to know how I felt, what I thought. She simply asked for the truth. So I had to realign my thinking to say, you know what? 50 years later, I can tell you the truth, Traci. I can tell you exactly what happened. I can tell you all the movements. I can tell you what I felt in my heart. I can tell you what I seen. Thank you, Traci. Because you pulled something out of me that I never thought that could come out of me. During the course of history, between 1968 and 1971, events happened literally that shook the world. The death of Martin Luther King. I see around here some people in my age category that can reflect to what I'm about to say. The death of Bobby Kennedy. My Lang. South Carolina State College massacre, Jackson College in Mississippi. Can I sing For Dead in Ohio? That happened too in that particular era. The ironic part about it, when we talk about massacres of that caliber, we talk about National Guard, we talk about United States officers. We killed our own. We killed our own. And I can talk to you about Attica. But you know what? Attica was yesterday for me. That's not my world today. I am so proud to say, thank you, Stanley, because you resurrected something that I believed in after doing, wait for it, 29 years in prison for a crime. I told myself leaving prison gates, I will not, and I refused to be the person I was when I went in. So I had to evolve to where I am right now. I witnessed what happened in Attica, September 9th, 1971 to September 13th, 1971. I was shot 2 or 3 times. I don't know how many times I was shot. I really don't. I know a shotgun blast from a double-aught shotgun, which is outlawed in this country back then, went through my hair, because my hands on your head, you would not be harmed. I had a big afro then. I remember. And the blast went straight through and knocked me down. Then I remember my leg jumping because I got shot in the leg as well as the foot. Bless the doctor from my Memorial Hospital that treated me, because he told me, sir, if it was a fraction of an inch closer, the head wound, a lobotomy would have been taken on you. But I will clean it up and you will survive. And I remember tears coming out of my eyes, because yes, I was scared after being shot, that I was going to live and survive. I don't dwell on that, but it's a memory that I can never forget. Now here's the kip. I think you may jump at it. Today I'm employed in the Kings County District Attorney's Office. That's Brooklyn. Thank you. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a special counselor for young men that get arrested for possession of guns. It's a violent crime in New York State, and who are active gang members. My job is to help them go from one extreme to the next. It's a very critical job. It's very crucial. And I am a very hard taskmaster. Why? Simply put, what I say to them, don't let my past be your future. And that's understood with them. Because after talking about Attica and demonstrating to them what can happen once you live in the belly of the beast, for the most part, they see it. Also, I'm president of a brand new organization called the Attica Brothers Memorial Foundation, in which we're looking to enhance and foster identity of people coming from prison to do better things as to go into that revolving door cycle. Hopefully, it'll get done. I'm not going to keep prolonging this, and I don't want to play the violin for you either. But you know, I quote William Faulkner, never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth. Spencer Johnson said, integrity is telling myself that the truth and being honest. I'm an avowed Christian as well. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness others deceit. Proverbs 12:17. And without further ado, in recognizing what Stanley Nelson and Traci Curry did, I say thank you. And the world should say thank you too, because if it not had been for the expose of what Stanley and Traci did, you would never know that the former president of this country, the same old guy, Tricky Dick, and Mr. Nelson Rockefeller, governor, collaborated to have 39 people killed, 39 citizens. Let's don't differentiate between a person confined and a person who is being kept. Let's don't differentiate. 39 United States citizens was killed. Thank you, Ron. Thanks for speaking on it in 1968. Thank you for the 4 dead in Ohio who was putting dandelion flowers in the rifles of Ohio State National Guardsmen before they turned on them. Yes, I've heard a lot said prior to me coming here about how we are evolving to an extreme that's not necessary. And I am appreciative of being here to address the issue that some of us has got to say, that is wrong, or that is right. I'm not going to go on a tangent. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Traci. May I present?
I'll bring it to you. I'm at a loss for words. I think that, well, first, we're just so honored to get this prize and to be recognized. I think that Tyrone just reminded me of the fact that, the films are important, but on a personal level, it's the people we meet and the experiences that we go through when we're making these films. And I just was reminded that when Tyrone gave that beautiful introduction. I had been thinking about making a film about Anika for 20, 30 years before we started this film 4 or 5 years ago. And at that time, we just felt, it was kind of now or never, and that it was a time that we could make the film. It's been an incredible ride. It's reached so many people. And it's at a time where, even history is contested, and we feel and we felt in making this film that there is a truth, there are facts, there are memories of what happened, there's footage of what happened, and that it was a story that had to be told and could be told. And we're just really proud that people get to see it. I'm reminded always of one of the scenes in the film on the first night where the inmates have taken over Anika, and they're outside, and one of the inmates is looking around, in this strange way, and one of the other inmates asks him, what's wrong? And he says, it's the first time I've been out at night and seen the night sky in 22 years. We have over 2 million people in this country that are incarcerated, who will not see the night sky tonight and won't see the night sky tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. I hope that Anika, just for a minute at least, makes people think about the people that won't see the night sky. Thank you, Traci.
Thank you so much to the Ridenhour Prizes for this incredible honor, not just of the award, but being included in the company of these amazing awardees. So my instinct as a filmmaker is always to make myself as small as possible to create the largest possible space for the story and the people who lived it. which is what I'm sort of feeling in this moment. It is true that the events of September 13th, 1971 are an affront to us all as the public in the way that any abuse of law enforcement power, any abuse of state power is an affront to us all as the people who vest the state with that power, right? As you heard Tyrone say, it was the massacre of 39 people and the injury to many, many more than that, one of whom is standing right here with us, that was committed by law enforcement at the behest of not only the head of New York State, but the head of the American state. And that does implicate the public, again, as the people who give the power to these state officials. But it is also true, and we can't lose sight of the fact that this is something that happened to human beings, to 39 plus, 60-something other human beings, right? Many of whom, if you stay later for the screening, you'll see in the film. These are people that did not have to tell their story to us. These are people that did not have to recount what for every single one of them was a defining trauma of their lives. For us, I don't think there was a single person that I spoke to for this film that does not to this day carry the scars, both emotional and, in Tyrone's case, physical, of what happened that day. And so there's no small thing for us to have approached these folks and asked them to please recount for us in great detail on camera for the widest possible viewing audience your trauma and to relive that for us. So I just never want to lose sight of their grace and their courage in sharing those slices of their lives with us in the interest of telling the truth. So thank you again so much to the Ridenhour Prizes for this award, and thank you also to Tyrone and all of the other survivors of Attica who allowed us to tell this story. Thank you.
So you just got a taste of their work. For those of you who are here in town, I hope you can join us at the screening of the film at 3:30 today at the E Street Theater, which is only a block from here. And Traci and Tyrone have agreed to join us and will be answering questions, so I hope you can stay this afternoon. Before we head into our next award, we'd again like to thank our sponsors, Cross Currents Foundation, Defending Dissent, Democracy Fund, Katz Marshall Banks, and Zuckerman Law, and all those individual supporters. That support is allowing us to do what we're doing today, and please consider joining them. We next have the Ridenhour Book Prize, which honors an outstanding work of social significance from the prior publishing year. The prize also recognizes investigative and repertorial distinction. Like our documentary prize winners, this year's book prize winner started with a story that most Americans think they already knew. Presenting the Ridenhour Book Prize is award-winning author, poet, scholar, and educator Clint Smith. Let's watch him.
When I was a child growing up in New Orleans, I remember being inundated in ways both explicit and subtle with messages touting all the things that were wrong with Black people. It was a seemingly endless barrage of pathology that was wielded to suggest that Black people were singularly responsible for the inequality we were experiencing. I remember a feeling of social and emotional paralysis, knowing that what I was hearing was wrong, but not having the language, the toolkit, or the framework with which to push back against it. I had little understanding of the historical phenomenon that underpinned racial inequality in New Orleans and across the country. I did not have the historical acumen to challenge the ideas that I knew in my gut were dangerous and untrue. And what happens when you're a child inundated with messages about all of the things that are wrong with you and the people around you, and you don't have the information with which to challenge it? The most insidious but logical endpoint is that you will begin to internalize some of these ideas. how I wish so desperately that I had had a book like The Sum of Us when I was growing up. It is a book that is at once generous and uncompromising. It is at once expansive and granular. It brings together some of the most compelling social science data on race and inequality while never sacrificing the nuanced texture of real human experiences. Heather travels across the country and across history to help the reader understand all of the ways that racism is hurting not just people of color, but all of us. If I had had a book like this, I can't imagine how freeing it would have been, how emancipatory it would have been, to have the language, to have the understanding, to have the data, to understand that the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way is not because of the people in those communities, but is because of what has been done to those communities generation after generation after generation. This work is an extension of Heather McGhee's commitment of combating racism and inequality and all that emerges from it. Even beyond this book, whether she is on a podcast, giving a lecture, or a panelist on Meet the Press, Heather's words and ideas are undergirded with a sense of moral urgency, as well as a thoughtfulness that allows people to hear her, including those who might not otherwise have been inclined to listen. I can think of no book more worthy of this prize than hers. Congratulations, Heather. And let's continue to put this book in the hands of every single person we meet.
The 2022 book prize goes to Heather McGhee.
Thank you to the Book Prize Selection Committee, to the Project on Government Oversight, to the entire team at the Ridenhour Prizes. I'm so grateful also to Clint Smith for the beautiful introduction, and want to say congratulations to the legendary and courageous people with whom I'm sharing this year's award ceremony. I'm sorry I can't be there today with you in person to celebrate you. I'm humbled. When I set out to write The Sum of Us, I hoped that my journey would help readers figure out something fundamental about American society, a truth, but not a single fact, but maybe an insight or a way of seeing inside our country, a way of seeing it that makes everything around it clearer. That insight is that racism, sold by a self-interested elite in order to further their greed, erodes everything that we have in common. It drains the pool of public resources that we all need, and it hollows out our ability to solve big problems together. And since The Sum of Us identified for me that central truth, fresh evidence of this dynamic has appeared on an almost daily basis. January 6th, the politicized and racialized pandemic response, the banning of books and cutting off funding for public schools and libraries for teaching about racism and sexism. But I've actually spent the better part of 2022 back out on the road for a new journey inspired not by the drained pool, but by the idea of the solidarity dividend, of these gains that we can unlock, these real victories that we can win by coming together across lines of race. That journey is now documented as a podcast, also called The Sum of Us. And the thing is, it introduced me to dozens of people who are just heroes among us. They're people who don't deny the darkness, but who kind of use it to see the stars. They're people who are unafraid to face the truth of our history, to learn how to spot the enemies of democracy in our midst, and to band together to make the promise of a multiracial democracy real for our future. And so, with profound gratitude for the recognition of The Sum of Us, I want to dedicate this prize to them, to all the people that I've met on my journey to write The Sum of Us and to create the audio documentary, who've shared their America with me and inspired me to keep fighting for a better one. Thank you.
Our final award goes to the Ridenhour Courage Prize. Each year, this prize is presented to an individual in recognition of their courageous and lifelong defense of the public interest and passionate commitment to social justice. Throughout her career, this year's honoree has dedicated herself to educating the nation on gender-based violence and its cultural and structural impacts. Her honesty and clarity brought unprecedented awareness on the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace, inspiring women to create spaces to share their own experiences and ultimately to change the law and cultural norms. And as we've heard today, her courage continues to inspire new generations of truth tellers. Presenting the Ridenhour Courage Prize, Jane Mayer, investigative reporter for The New Yorker and author of several critically acclaimed books. Of particular note for this community was her Polk award-winning New Yorker article about the prosecution of NSA whistleblower and 2011 Ridenhour truth teller Thomas Drake. That article helped to push the Obama administration to drop their misguided persecution of him. Would you like to come up, Jane? Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is an amazing group of people to be among, so thank you so much for including me here today. To fully appreciate this moment, you need to go back 31 years. No one was coming to save her. That much was obvious in October 1991 as the Democrats, including Joe Biden, sat mum while Republican senators relentlessly attacked Anita Hill, then an unknown law professor from Oklahoma. They portrayed her as a liar, an erotomaniac, and worse. How must that have felt, especially for her elderly parents, Elbert and Irma Hill, who had come to Washington, their first trip on an airplane, to stand by their daughter, the baby, in their family of 13 children. Watching those hearings, I was among the millions of Americans impressed by Anita Hill's strength, her ability to remain composed and unrattled as the hostile questions kept coming, a concerted onslaught orchestrated by the Bush White House. What was the source of her courage and strength? As it is today, it's her unshakable belief that once called to testify by the Senate, she owed her country the truth. She didn't ask for the spotlight or to have a place in history, but when summoned to stand up, bear witness, and speak truth to power, she didn't hesitate, despite the obvious personal cost she would pay. Isn't that basically what the definition of a hero is? Someone who, in the moment of decision, does the right thing, regardless of personal sacrifice? Over the decades, as I've gotten to know Anita better, my admiration for her has only grown. Many of us would have wilted under such a sudden, intense public spotlight, but she has used her unwanted fame to make other women stronger. Way before Me Too was a hashtag or a movement, Anita Hill was Me One. It was Anita who gave our country a masterclass on sexual harassment and brought the issues out of the shadows and into the public arena. Her courage in telling her own story gave countless women the courage to tell theirs. I've seen her reach out to Christine Blasey Ford, another credible witness who Senate Republicans tried to crush during confirmation hearings for another justice who critics suspect may have perjured himself to win a seat on the Supreme Court. There's a moving scene in the wonderful documentary Anita, where she reads from the thousands of letters she has received over the years from women across the globe, many thanking her for her example. Another shows her happily mixing it up with much younger girls in a public school, answering their questions about how to stand up against sexual predators. Because I was interviewed for that film, I had the pleasure of attending its premiere at Sundance, along with Chuck and some of the Hill siblings. It was a joy to see up close Anita's strength of character and her sly sense of humor about herself, and to see that history and the long arc of justice were bending her way. For the 1994 book I wrote with Jill Abramson, Strange Justice, I spent 3 years investigating Anita and the aftermath of those hearings. As reporters, we were intent on following the facts wherever they led, regardless of politics. We pressed Anita hard, so much so that I recall her being quite annoyed with me. But there were absolutely no holes in her testimony. She told us that she had hoped to return to the same life she'd had before the hearings. I thought I'd come to Washington, tell my story, and go home. She laughed about her naivete. Instead, she became the target of bomb threats and calls for her to be fired from her professorship. Unsurprisingly, she again showed dignity in the face of lies. Now, our political culture is saturated with lies, and we're living with the terrible consequences of a right-wing court that is reversing rights that most Americans hold dear. In this hostile environment, which threatens the rule of law and democracy, our country desperately needs people who confront political chicanery and are steadfast in their love of the Constitution. We need people who, above all else, have the courage to tell the truth. Nobody embodies these values more than Anita Hill. It is my sincere honor to introduce her.
Thank you, Jen. It's an honor to be introduced by you. And that introduction was beautiful and so moving. I can really think of no one who is more committed to advancing the truth, informing the public than you are. I wish I could be with you all in public. And I especially want to say, that I'm so proud to be with this group of honorees today. I want to thank the Fertel Foundation and the Selection Committee for honoring me with the Ridenhour Prize, because I know that there are so many people who are courageous out there who could be receiving this award. When I testified in 1991 about sexual harassment, most people didn't even know what it was or that it was against the law. Our legal systems had all too often allowed businesses to shirk responsibility for the behavior in their workplaces, and people were left on their own to respond to behavior that was outrageous, frankly. And our political leaders refused to address it in their own quarters as well. After the hearing, one pundit declared that there was nothing to be learned from the Senate Judiciary Committee's treatment of my testimony. He was absolutely wrong. In the hearing's wake, public and private conversations about sexual harassment advanced our understanding of the law and of political representation. They exposed how systems fail to ensure that victims know how and can afford to take the protections, pursue the protections that are available to them, or at least very well should be. The post-hearing conversations increased women's political participation. And eventually the conversation about sexual harassment expanded and to cover all forms of gender violence, and led to a reckoning that included demands for laws and processes that protect rights and ensure basic safety. Landmark civil rights legislation was passed. Educators and media introduced new understanding about intersectionality, a phrase that was just coming into vogue, and how it shapes individual experience with bias and violence. And there is today a growing movement among men facing their own experiences truthfully and honestly with sexual violence as victims and in some cases as abusers. And as we enter an era when books about race, sexual and gender identity are banned, and teachers are fired for teaching these topics, we as a public, many of us, and maybe not enough, but it's a growing number, we are letting it be known that withholding knowledge will in fact increase the risk of violence to young people of color and LGBTIQ youth. This is what happened in 1991 and the years after. So when people tell me or say to me about the hearings, well, I'm so sorry you lost, I have to respond and say, I didn't lose. I was heard, and the conversation continues, and it's growing. I have to admit, none of this that I've just talked about was on my mind as I testified in 1991. What mattered most to me was whether I honored my parents, who Jane mentioned, Irma and Albert Hill, who had suffered decades of blatant sexism, racism, and classism in their lives, and had always taught me to tell the truth, even under the harshest conditions, and to stand up for what's right. And in so many ways, and more than I can even articulate, so many ways, they are the reason that I have survived for the past 31 years. I've had other inspirations as well. I've been inspired by communities and organizations that are digging in and doing the hard work to eliminate gender violence, by individuals who have come forward with their stories, by the Me Too movement, and of course by Christine Blasey Ford's brave testimony once again before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And today, Anika Navaroli honors me, makes me very proud, and renews my hope for her generation. A generation of people who are going to be speaking out and standing up. 53 years ago, Ronald Ridenhour showed America what is needed even today. Beyond believing truth tellers, leaders need to put in place systems that welcome disclosures and that hold institutions accountable for correcting the wrongs that informers tell about and fully explain and fully support. I've been accused of boiling the water, as they say, and ending gender violence is like boiling the ocean. And I'm sure many of the awardees today feel the same about the issues that you address. They're so big, they're so complex, and so unfortunately entrenched in our society. But I can only speak for myself. I think I can speak for others as well in the room. Those of you who are dealing with the complexities, who are addressing it, who are bravely standing up, who are committed to the truth and advancing justice and knowledge. If I had to do the past 31 years over again, I would. And I'm sure many of you have the same sentiment. I cannot tell you how much this honor means to me and how much your presence and the honor of receiving the Ridenhour Prize will make my journey easier. And so I thank you. I could say so much more about how this world has changed, not simply because I sat in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and told my truth, but because the public heard me. They listened, and many of you responded. And that's really what we all want. We want to be heard We want to be respected. We want our voices valued. And quite frankly, we want change. Thank you.
Pretty great, huh? Thank you to all our presenters and our honorees today. This event could not have happened without all of your bravery and fantastic work. Also, I want to thank our strategic partners and our sponsors, Cross Currents Foundation, Defending Dissent, Democracy Fund, Katz, Marshall & Banks, and Zuckerman Law. And a growing... Sorry, I didn't realize that. Katz, Banks, and Cumin. Okay. Let's start all over again. And anyway, I hope you also do consider joining this group of fabulous people who are helping to make this event possible. For those of you who are joining us here or remotely, I really want to thank you too as well for helping to celebrate all of these people who speak up and speak out to push our democracy to meet its full potential. Our celebrations will continue this afternoon with 2 more events. For those of you who are here at the Press Club, we hope you'll be able to join us at 3:30 for the screening of Attica at the East Street Theater. And if you'd like to join us and have not yet registered for that event, please come to the registration desk and we'll get you a ticket. For our online community, we have an exclusive conversation between whistleblower Dr. Rick Bright and our beloved Roberta Baskin, award-winning journalist and longtime friend of the Ridenhour Prizes. That will begin at 2:45, and those of you in the room who can stay will be having that on the screen, so we'll be able to watch that as well. So please also join me in thanking Janelle Williams, who has brilliantly managed today's event. And she has grown the Ridenhour programming to be year-round. We hope you'll continue to connect and engage with this growing community by visiting ridenhour.org or scanning that QR code. You can sign up and be hearing about all the events that will be continuing to happen through the rest of the year. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you all next year.